Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and over the past few months, many people have been messaging me, asking me about different display issues that might happen on their iPhones, some being past iPhones, some being modern iPhones, the iPhone 13 Pro Max, for example, and I wanted to go over the certain display issues that you may be experiencing, maybe where they originated, what you can do about them, and whether or not you should be concerned. Now, with the iPhone 8 Plus and earlier, Apple was always considered to have some of the best displays on the market, if not the very best displays. This is when they had LCD displays that are super color accurate, had very high pixel densities, and with the 8 Plus with a 1080p display, it just looks great overall. It has great brightness and more. However, once they switched away from LCD and started to implement OLED displays, there comes different things that caused problems over the years. So with OLED displays, there are some compromises as far as color accuracy compared to LCDs. For example, Apple's Pro Display XDR being $5,000 uses an LCD, and that's for color accuracy. And there's other advantages and disadvantages here and there. But with the OLED displays and the introduction of the iPhone 10, Apple implemented OLED, which was great for vibrant colors and deep blacks, but also comes with its own set of problems, like I said. So you have PWM, where it controls the brightness by flickering the display, and early on the iPhone 10, it was bad enough that it really bothered my eyes to the point where it made me investigate why this was happening, and I discovered what PWM was, or pulse width modulation. So it flickers the display faster and slower depending on your brightness level. It's something you can see under 240 frames per second slow-mo, and causes about 10% of people to feel nauseated or sort of dizzy or maybe have eye strain, things like that. And I happen to be one of those, and they really didn't fix that issue for me until it was a high enough rate with maybe the iPhone 11 series. However, with the iPhone 11 series, we got our own set of problems. So with the iPhone 11, 11 Pro Max, it's a great phone, but with this phone, we had something called green tint. And green tint really wasn't something that affected everyone, but it definitely was visible for a lot of people. And what that means is you would get a green tint around the outside edge that would sort of be there at lower brightness levels. So this is something when it was at low brightness levels or other brightness levels, sometimes people would see this. I have an example of what it would look like, and it continued on the iPhone 12 series phone. So you can see here's green tint. This is on a forum from GSM Arena, and it gives an idea that there'd be a sort of a green tint or glow to the display. Now, Apple originally fixed this on the 11 Pro Max with an update. 13.6.1 fixed this issue on the 11 Pro Max, but we haven't seen a fix since for any other devices. It was released on August 12th of 2020, and Apple said they fixed a thermal management issue that caused some displays to exhibit a green tint. However, once they fixed that, it seemed to resolve it for most people, but once the iPhone 12 devices came out, they continued to have that issue, and they haven't seemingly fixed it or really acknowledged it since. And so with the iPhone 12 series, some people are still experiencing this issue. Thankfully, I've never seen it on my devices, but it was an issue for a lot of people. So on the 12 series device, you'll see this green tint, and Apple never pushed out an update fixing thermal management or anything else that was causing it. So people that were having this issue usually could bring it to Apple and have them take a look at it. And if they could prove that they were having the issue, many times people would just get their devices swapped. And I've heard from many of you that said they were able to do that. However, there was an additional problem with the iPhone 12 Pros and 12 Pro Maxes. Once they went to the flat-edged sides, they actually had a problem with display gaps. And what that means is around the outside edge, we would have a gap between the actual frame of the phone and the display glass itself. And so we can't really see that here. So you can see here, you are going to have a little bit of a gap just from tolerances of the glass, but some people had very large gaps where you could actually see down into the phone. Now, this is a 12 Pro Max. I actually have a different one here that's the Pacific blue color where it actually has a slightly larger gap, and I wanted to share that with you. And so if we go in real close to this upper right edge of my iPhone 12 Pro Max, you'll see it's not exactly perfect around the outside edge as far as how it presses up against the frame. This is okay in some ways because we don't want it to touch the frame. If we drop it, it could crack the glass more easily, but you can easily fit something like a piece of paper in between this corner here. So You'll see you can easily fit that in there. Now you can do this on a 13 Pro Max too if you're very careful, but it's just much easier to do that on something like a 12 Pro Max that actually has that display gap. Now this really isn't a problem if it's not a noticeable change or difference where you can see into the frame, or can't see into the frame rather. It's not really a problem because it's sealed. There's actually adhesive around the outside edge that gives it its water resistance and everything else. So the actual tolerances really improved over the years, and we don't see this too much anymore. But this was something we saw early on with the early releases of this phone that they've since seemingly fixed. Now around the 13 Pro Max, you can see that there isn't a display gap issue at all. In fact, there's a nice sort of even gap around the outside edge. This is much like gaps in cars where you have panel alignment, the same sort of thing. Some sort of tolerance is going to be allowed. Like I said, if you drop your phone, you don't want it to sort of pinch the display and crack the display that way. So you want a little bit of a cushion, but you don't want a big enough one where you allow intrusion into the device from different materials, whether that be sand or water or anything else. So it looks great on the most recent phones. And even later on some of the iPhone 12 series, Apple seemed to fix this problem right away. So on the 12 series, no issues here on this one. So if you do have that issue, maybe you got a new phone and it has these big gaps in it, I would recommend just bringing it to Apple and see what they think. Typically, they'll replace it if you have big display gaps and it was brand new. Otherwise, if you replace the display, well, that's sort of on whoever replaced the display. But if you have a brand new phone with big gaps in it, well, you could definitely have them take a look. It's an expensive phone, and I recommend that to everyone that has that. Now, there is a new issue with the 13 Pro Max where some people are experiencing red tint. And you can see here, this is on the Mac Rumors forum, where someone has some red tint on the very leading edge of the right side of the phone. This is something that seems to be going on for some people. I haven't seen this myself on this display. However, on my wife's, I have seen green tint on the 13 Pro series, or the 12 Pro series, and even some of the 13. So I have seen it from time to time. It typically is at very low brightness when it's on a dark display. However, with the red tint, again, it seems to be one of those issues in a very dark environment. Apple has not acknowledged the red tint and hasn't said if there's going to be a fix for it. So if you have an extreme version of that, maybe bring it to Apple and see what they think. But typically, I would try and wait for a software update since the 13 is well away from getting software updates through iOS 15. But if it's something that's major, it's not looking correct, or it's not color accurate, there can be an issue. There's also a known issue with pink display issues. Now, thankfully, Apple has actually acknowledged this, where the display could go pink, the phone reboots, it's sort of a pinkish purple color, the phone reboots, and then is back to normal. This is something that Apple's acknowledged, that they're aware of, and I would expect to be fixed in a software update. In fact, at the time of this video, the most recent software update seems to have resolved it for most people. So I have seen it on my 13 Pro Max personally. I've seen it a couple updates ago. It rebooted and it was fine ever since. But I have seen that where it just goes completely purple or pink and goes back to normal. So that's definitely an odd issue that they need to resolve. Now, Apple's ProMotion is something that came to the iPhone 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max, where it can speed the display refresh rate up to 120 Hertz and down to 10 Hertz. 10 Hertz to save battery, and it really does help with saving battery. However, it's been a problem for some people in third-party apps, where it's been difficult for the developer to sort of implement that ProMotion option. So now with iOS 15.4, they'll be able to more accurately control ProMotion and really make their apps seem super smooth. If you go into Apple's settings and things like that, it's definitely smooth. But in some apps that haven't implemented it, you can see the difference. So Apple will be updating 15.4 in a couple weeks, at least from this video. And once that's out, developers will have an easier way to implement that change, and we should see it in more and more apps. So that's something that they've acknowledged. We know that's out there and shouldn't be a problem. Now, additionally, there's color accuracy between the different devices. The iPhone 12 series devices got a lot of complaints that it was a little bit too warm, and you can actually see that. So if we go into the display, into settings on a white background, go to display settings, you'll see I have True Tone and Night Shift turned off. The display on the left is definitely warmer. Now, a lot of people said this was due to color accuracy, since it was very color accurate. And if you've ever calibrated a display, it does seem to be a bit warm. So the newer display on the 13 series phones definitely is more pleasing and seems to be more accurate. However, it's hard to say unless you put a colorimeter on it to see which one is more accurate. However, the 13 Pro Max definitely looks better to my eyes. You can fix this by turning off True Tone, somewhat adjusting the color and accessibility, but typically they're pretty accurate out of the out of the factory and look really good. So definitely better on the 13 Pro Max in my opinion, but some people prefer the 12 Pro Max. But it was something that was brought up quite a bit. Now, as far as if you should be concerned, the first thing to know is that there are hundreds of millions, if not billions of Apple devices out there. When you have that many devices, there's bound to be problems along the way. Every display is not 100% the same, and Samsung makes a lot of the displays, and they also have those problems on their devices. You just don't hear about it as much, as the Apple community is much more vocal. However, if you go searching for it, you'll definitely find that on Samsung devices and others. So green tint and things like that are not unheard of elsewhere, and when you have 100 million new iPhones a year or billions over its lifetime, you're definitely going to find some that have problems. It's just the way it goes, and you're going to have devices that even fail because there's so many of them out there. But the majority of people aren't going to have that issue, and Apple's very good at replacing them when you do have major issues. So really, it depends on what device you have, what the problem is. Maybe you have a big display gap. I would definitely bring that to Apple. If you have red tint, I might hold off on that one. Just depends what it is. Now, also, a lot of people have asked me about burn-in over time, and burn-in on the iPhone X being that it's the oldest OLED display and the highest likelihood of having burn-in, which typically only happens really on OLED displays. It can happen on others, but it's more prevalent on OLEDs. You can see that by going to a gray background. And so if you go to a gray background, I have this one just saved in Photos. You can just search for it in Google, and you'll see here, you can see around the outside edges if you have burn-in. Burn-in is just sort of remnants of what was there last. Typically, you only see this when you're on the same sort of display for a long time, meaning maybe you're on the home screen and it's left on in a store for many hours per day, specifically at very high brightnesses. So if it's at super high brightness over a long period of time, it can burn into the display permanently. So that's something that's just known for OLED displays. You don't see it too much on iPhones because it seems to manage it well, but you will see it from time to time where you might have your battery indicator outline still there when you go to a gray display. So something along those lines. If you go to something gray, you might see a battery indicator or something like that. So again, we'll go to Photos. We'll go into this. I don't have that, but some people do have that. So just keep in mind, it's not a very big problem on iPhones at all. I rarely hear about it, but it's something I wanted to mention. There is one final thing I wanted to mention that is more of a compromise of the display type than anything else, and that has to do with the iPad with the mini LED displays. On the 12.9-inch iPad Pro and MacBook Pro, we now have mini LED displays. These are great for viewing angles, super color accuracy, and incredibly bright for HDR content. However, that comes with a compromise of having what's called bloom. So that's sort of a lit up area in the background that really shouldn't be lit up, but you see it because you're on a dark background. That's something that's just a compromise on the display as opposed to a problem with the display. You'll see this, but Apple chooses to use LCD because they're more color accurate than OLED displays at this point. But I can show you what that looks like by going to a dark background. So if we go into settings and pick the black wallpaper, turn the lights off, turn the display brightness all the way up, and use the cursor. Around the cursor, you can sort of see sort of a halo around it. Let me zoom in. And so around this cursor, maybe you can see there's a halo around the outside edge of it, and it's not something that bothers me too much, as I don't see it unless you're on the darkest of backgrounds and at a very high brightness. However, most of the time you're not going to see it. Some people will really be bothered by it if they're using very deep backgrounds or dark backgrounds. However, it's not a problem. It's just a display compromise based on the technology. Now, also on the iPad mini, we have jelly scrolling. This is something that's, again, part of the way the display works. So when you're scrolling vertically on maybe settings or something like that, you can see sort of what they call a jelly effect, where the lines are not perfectly straight. They sort of have this effect where they look like jelly. And so this is something that is actually being challenged with a lawsuit, but it's technically just the way the display is built. Apple could have built it a different way, but they decided to do that. No one in my family that has used the new iPad mini has mentioned the problem. I've never mentioned it to them, and I think most people won't see it, but those who are really into displays, it definitely will bother. Now, even mentioning all those different issues, Apple's quality is top-notch when it comes to the overall manufacturing, the quality of their devices compared compared to many others out there. They're at the very top of the flagship phones compared to other manufacturers as well. They're some of the best built devices and what many people aspire to. So most of the time I really would not be concerned, especially given the huge amount of numbers of devices that they actually manufacture. So if you do have a major issue, definitely have Apple check it out. They typically have a warranty of up to about a year or so, but if you're not having any major issues, that's what most people experience and why you don't hear about it as much. However, if you are having those issues, like I said, have Apple check it out. If you are having any of those, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and if Apple has helped you out in any way as far as that goes. I'd love to hear what you have to say and what Apple actually had to say regarding those issues. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.